Okay. Well, welcome everybody. Can everybody hear me okay? Because I can just keep hearing the music.
Yes, I can hear you fine.
Okay. Okay, so welcome everybody to our webinar today. It's a great pleasure to have everybody with us today. It's another one of our Center for Academic Integrity in the UAE Practitioner Series events. And today we're going to be looking at including students in academic integrity conversations. This is obviously something that we've been thinking and talking about in the last couple of events, particularly with our student board, and looking at different types of voices, wherever we can hear them, wherever we can really give them a voice and an opportunity to discuss. And so we will particularly be focusing on the issue of assessments and the way in which we can better understand and design these. So we're going to introduce our speaker in a few minutes, but just to give you an idea of the way that the session will run. We're going to have a presentation about assessment design and its particular relation to academic integrity. We're going to open it up for some of our colleagues to share best practices about what's currently being done and engaged. And then we'll obviously have the chance for a discussion Q&A towards the end of the session. It's now just after 4 o'clock UAE time, and we will hopefully go until 5 o'clock. Zenith, would you like to say a few words welcoming to the center for those who are new or etc.?
Of course, thank you so much, Chris. It's a fantastic initiative that actually Chris had originally recommended that we do a practitioner series. So it's awesome that this is our third series that we've already started doing. We launched the center on 20th of October, so it's not been that long, but our series has been well received. The last two events were very well received. The comments and feedbacks were awesome. So it's fantastic that we have this one particularly geared towards discussing assessments today. So I take the opportunity to, of course, invite all the speakers, particularly Krishnan and Tendai for giving us the time and joining us today, and of course sharing with us your best practices. I'm sure our audience is going to really enjoy this. We do have some new members of the center who are also joining, so welcome aboard everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zenith. So without further ado, let me introduce our event itself and our speakers. So that's me. We don't have to worry about me. More important people. One of my colleagues, it's a great pleasure to have him with us today, Dr. Tendai Charles, who is both a member of the faculty, assistant professor of education at the British University in Dubai. But I think possibly more relevantly for today, he's also the director and creator of the Center of Research in Digital Education, and has spent the last, well, certainly 14 months under lockdown, thinking, researching, developing, practicing many issues within the online learning space, including assessment in particular. And so I'm thrilled to have Tendai with us today to discuss his ideas and some of the areas he's been working on in the recent past. We're also joined by Dr. Krishnadas Nanath, who's an associate professor in the Computer Engineering and Informatics at Middlesex University. And he will be joining us after Tendai's talk to offer some insights about Middlesex University's current best practice, some of the challenges they've been facing, and indeed some of the responses that they've come up with. And then two of our colleagues, Srijeth and Stephen from Middlesex and Heriot Watt, respectively, will be joining the conversation to additionally share best practices and to hopefully lead the debate leading into the question and answer period. So I think with that, we can begin our session. So Tendai, if I can hand over to you, please, to begin your talk, and we very much look forward to what you have to say.
Well, thank you. I'm just going to try to share my screen. Can you see my slides there?
Yes.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all initially for inviting me to today's session. I think the centre's mission is fantastic, and it's wonderful to see a centre like this in the UAE. And essentially, there were just three main points I wanted to try to discuss with you today. So first of all, I wanted us to reflect upon assessment practices before COVID-19. Obviously, COVID-19 has been a game-changing event. There's been a huge paradigm shift within the field of education. But what's happened is lots of the flaws within the education industry are now being highlighted, and educators are blaming COVID-19 on this when many of these flaws were there, for many years. And so if you look back 5-10 years ago, at many TED Talks, you can find leading thinkers highlighting some of the problems that we have in the education industry. So one of my favorite speakers is Sir Ken Robinson. Back in 2007, he spoke about schools potentially killing creativity in young learners. In 2013, he spoke about education's death valley, which is some very strong language there. And in 2015, he spoke about a learning revolution. And not just him, there were many others as well, highlighting and talking about some of the flaws and problems we have in education and how we need to rectify them. One of the other issues we had was to do with assessment. And so we had people like Sal Khan, who also delivered a TED Talk back in 2016, saying that we need to focus on the learning content and students developing their skills and mastery rather than focusing on test scores. And I think what he was trying to highlight there was very important, because many institutions had a mission of preparing students for tests, right? So if you think about your typical secondary school, once the kids get to 14, 15, it all becomes about GCSE examination preparation. If you think about in the USA, they have the SAT exams, and so there's tons of books and courses preparing students for SATs. If you think internationally, you have exams like the IELTS test. And so you have centers set up just to prepare students for the IELTS examination, rather than helping them to develop their English language, which is what the aim of the IELTS is. The aim of the IELTS test is to measure a person's English language ability, and that wasn't happening. And so with this huge focus on tests and examinations, something which is quite important to me and dear to my heart is the concept of test anxiety. It's something that I've spoken about previously that I myself has experienced, and I know many people have experienced this as well, where essentially test anxiety is a case where a person feels extreme distress or stress in an exam situation. And interestingly, the University of Manchester did some research back in 2015, where they looked at the reasons why teenagers in the UK commit suicide. And what they found were that 29% of teenagers who took their own lives back in the 2014-2015 period did so as a direct result of test anxiety. So what these young children were doing were either the day before an exam, or on the day of the exam, or the day after the exam, they would commit suicide. So these were obviously major exams like GCSEs and A-levels. And quite surprisingly for me, when I read this article, was that there were more suicides committed due to test anxiety than compared to bullying. And so we know that the harms of bullying, that bullying is dangerous, but I don't think people are fully aware of the stress involved in exams. And when I first mentioned this statistic to people, the initial response is, oh, there must have been something wrong with those children, right? There must have been some serious problems in their lives. But actually, I think that's a form of victim blaming, right? So these children are victims of the pressures that come along with exams, and we need to acknowledge that. So, okay, that's sort of pre-COVID-19. Now, since the pandemic started, I think globally we've seen the same thing happen everywhere around the world. In the higher education sector, so in universities, we've seen students' grades increase astronomically. So if you think about the sort of bell curve that we'd normally see. You'd normally see in any course, some students do very well, some perform quite poorly, and then the vast majority of students will be somewhere in the middle. But what we saw during the pandemic was that all the students' grades were increasing. Right. So I've seen some students here do research, some of my master's degree students and PhD students do research here in the region, and they're finding that students' grades online are much better than they were in class. And I think one of the reasons for that is because students have become very clever with cheating. So if you look at Instagram and TikTok and Snapchat and all these platforms, there are videos and tips created by teenagers explaining how to get around these online systems. So when you think about things like Turnitin, they explain how to get around the Turnitin system. If you think about these lockdown browsers, there are apps that children can install onto their computers to get around these lockdown browsers. And so the students are being very clever at university and getting around the system. And so online examinations aren't really the most effective way to measure learning. And unfortunately, in the K-12 sector, we're seeing lots of parents who are actually falling into a trap of actually supporting their children with cheating. So obviously, all parents, I believe, want their children to succeed academically, right? That's perfectly normal. That's perfectly fine. But previously, the parents weren't able to have as much influence into that practice as they can do now. And so you hear reports now of parents giving children answers during these online tests when they're doing it at home, which is obviously a huge problem. And so I think we really need to think about the role of parents in this new context where they're at home with their children whilst they're studying online. And so during the pandemic, particularly last year in 2020, I attended tons of webinars online like this one, where academics were discussing, online examinations. And I think more and more people were coming to the conclusion that these online exams just simply aren't working properly. And so I myself gave a TEDx talk in January asking the question, well, is it time for us to actually scrap exams in that case? Right? Knowing what we know about the harms of examinations and test anxiety and that sort of thing, and knowing that online examinations aren't the best way to measure learning, should we look at other forms of assessment practice? And so what I think we're going to see moving forward, I say post-COVID, it may not necessarily be 5 years from now. It may actually start this year. I think we're going to have to see a change in the way that we assess students. And particularly when we talk about academic integrity, why is it that young people decide to cheat? I think there are a number of reasons around that. But often it's related to the pressure on them to pass an exam in order to achieve a certain grade so they can, move up the academic ladder, let's say, to go to university or whatever. And one thing I think we need to recognize as educators is that for this younger generation, cheating isn't actually something that's seen as hugely negative, right? So if you think about many teenagers now, they play games like Fortnite and Call of Duty and these types of games. And there's a culture with these gamers of cheat codes, right? So the idea is that rather than figuring out everything about the game yourself, it's actually commendable to find out the cheat to hack the game, right? And even you look at young athletes nowadays, many of them are taking performance enhancing drugs and they see that as normal. It's nothing, shame. It's not to be blamed. It's not blameworthy, essentially. So I think this younger generation, they don't really see cheating as a huge problem, which is one issue. And I think on the other hand, for students who do acknowledge cheating as being something bad, often they don't really know much about academic integrity. So I myself, I'm on the committee here at the university known as the Unfair Means Committee. And essentially what we do is we review cases where students have been caught cheating. And so we interview these students, we sit with them, we talk with them, we find out why they cheated. And in many cases, the students don't realize they're cheating. So, a student will submit an essay, we say to the student, oh, you've cheated with this essay. And they say, no, I didn't cheat. Because for them, they think cheating means I've paid somebody to write the essay for me. They say, no, this is my work, I did it myself. We say, well, we can see that 40% of the essay has been copied from the internet. And they don't think that's cheating. They said, yeah, I found it on Google. They admit to that. So when we explain to them the notion of paraphrasing and citing your own sources, etc., then they sort of realize, oh, there's more to it than this, right? So I think we need to empower students with the knowledge of what academic integrity actually means and why it's better for them to do their own work rather than use somebody else's. And now that we're having parents involved with students' education as well, and moving forward, if we're going to see more blended education in the future, I think we need to educate parents about their role. And we need to make it very clear to them that by helping your children, when you're doing the work for them, you're not actually helping them at all. Right? You're putting them at disadvantage. So parents think, well, if I help the child, they'll then perform well on the exam and they can go to the university they want to. And then at university level, okay, they can study independently. But I think what would happen actually, if you spend 5 years helping the student, right? All you're doing is showing them that cheating is okay. So now when they are 18 and they're studying independently at university, they're just going to find other ways to cheat. Right? So I think we need to educate parents. But probably the most important issue moving forward is for us as educators and teachers and educational leaders, we really need to spend some time rethinking and redesigning how we measure learning and thinking about assessments. I often ask people, what do you understand by assessment? What does assessment mean? And most of the time people are thinking about diagnostics and they're thinking about, some sort of end of year exam to move on to another year or another course. And I think all of that needs to be, reevaluated essentially. When I speak to people about, things like test construct validity, often many teachers don't know what that means. So they don't actually know how to design tests in an effective way. And is it even important moving forward to have all these tests and exams? Are there other ways that we can measure how students are learning on a course? So I think those are some of the discussions we need to have moving forward. And again, I'd like to thank you all for inviting me here today just to share my opinion. And I'm looking forward to hearing some of the other opinions from the panel as well. So thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks very much, Tendai. You've raised many critical points. And I'll sort of try to review some of them, and we'll move over to some of our colleagues. We had sort of some comments in the chat function about your points about helping out friends, and it's not really cheating, and it's just working smart. And I think we take it a step further, and we think about crowdsourcing, and we think about the way in which help is brought in, and it's a case of you put a different spin on it, and that's a community, and that's a support network, and that's helping out a friend, or that's being creative, or it's not difficult to understand or to appreciate how that is perceived by others. And so I think your points about educating everybody within the equation, right? Students, teachers, parents, everybody, so you've highlighted the fact that students don't necessarily understand what they're doing is wrong from an academic integrity perspective, as you say, for the example you gave, because people are more than happy to say, I got it from Google. If it wasn't available, then I wouldn't have got it, right? That can't be wrong. I didn't have to pay for it secretly. It's, parents want the best, so all the motivations along the way are all valid. And then they just sort of come up against this invisible wall of academic integrity that nobody really seems to understand. But I think the point that you raised about teachers designing assessments in a way that is relevant to actually capturing and measuring learning on a meaningful scale, I think is something that we have to address moving forwards, because, as you say, COVID blamed for a lot of things, but COVID really highlighted things that we've done poorly. And so before we turn over to some of our colleagues, I was wondering, do you have any thoughts about sort of the practical nature of assessment design? Because you talked obviously very convincingly about the constructive element of how we design and why we design. And in many cases, many teachers, as you say, aren't thinking about this. We're just doing it because it fits the syllabus, or that's how we ran it last term, or it matches something else. So have you got any sort of reflection or views on maybe what you've been doing differently, or will begin to do differently over the next whatever the period is, right, which we don't know to define?
Yes, well, I think we need to find ways of measuring learning that aren't essentially an exam or a test. Because there's more to it than that. So one thing I try to do now, for example, many of my students are actually teachers, and so they need more ed tech type skills. And so sometimes I assess them now through video creation, right? So there's some sort of content that I want to teach them. And so I measure their understanding of that content through their creation of videos. and I have a rubric for assessing that video. But that's one very simple example. I would imagine that different disciplines need to figure out different ways of assessing students according to that discipline. So if we're looking at medical students in university, maybe there were more practical ways that they could measure, they could measure or demonstrate their understanding rather than taking a quiz. Or if there are computer science students who do programming, right? Maybe they can create some software. If there are engineering students who, architectural engineering, maybe there are things they can do. I think that we should probably try to think about different disciplines and how they can measure learning in an appropriate way that's suitable for that discipline, rather than having these bog standard exams for everybody. However, I do understand why we have these very systematic approaches to things. It makes it more easier to sort of have a standardized approach towards assessing learning and saying, well, this student is better than that student because they're able to perform better in this test. But then again, who are making these tests, and who are they to determine that this student is better than another student because they can, do X, Y, and Z on a particular exam? So I think there's very much a systemic problem we need to think about moving forward.
Yeah, I completely agree. And we've seen that evolution in different education systems where it morphed from being fully exams to sort of the coursework modular option to address sort of the different sort of learning styles of students. And obviously the point that you highlighted, the statistics about student welfare and response to testing, which in the real world is not relevant. You and I, or any of our colleagues listening, you don't get put in a room and said, you're not allowed to look at anything, you're not allowed to read anything, you're not allowed to address anything, and now you've got to, it's not a relevant way of actually holding information and sort of being relevant. So yes, this issue of sort of authentic assessment benchmarked against subjects, I think is an excellent point that you've brought up. And thank you very much for that. Thank you. Please don't go anywhere, because obviously we'll hopefully have some questions for you down the line. Could I turn perhaps to Dr. Krishnadath for your views on best practices within Middlesex, and then possibly Dr. Srijith, if you would like to sort of complement or join in, if that's available. Oh yes, you are there. Great. You can hear it? Yeah, wonderful. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christopher, and thank you, Professor Charles, for a wonderful presentation. In fact, it's such a wonderful issue that we are looking at, and I'm so happy that, first of all, there is a center that is discussing this and we can share our best practices. I would possibly like to start with, something that I wrote several years back. It was an article in Khaleej Times regarding how technology can be used to, assess the problems of academic integrity, assess cheatings, etc., etc. And what I've realized is, at one point of time when we were looking at technology and platforms like Turnitin and other tools which are available, and analytics which could assess the behavior, etc., etc. Over the years of teaching, I have realized that it's probably more important not to look at the tools that could, detect this plagiarism or identify the cheats. But I think it is more important to kind of go and look back at the reason why this is happening at the first place, which was one of the points that Professor Charles also highlighted. And this is where we started looking at, looking at from a student's point of view in terms of why would someone actually go ahead and get into these practices. Now, these practices could be as small as social loafing, let's say not contributing to a group project or assessment, or it could be as severe as paying someone an amount to do the work. And while technology is becoming brilliant in assessing the things, but it's also actually helping students. Recently, I received these notifications on Instagram that assignment tutor or someone is following you, and I get a message that do you need help in your assignments, without realizing that I'm actually a professor and not a student. They actually just look at the university and run these campaigns that reach you. So yeah, technology is being used by these people to reach you at the same place. So it's more important to go beyond technology and look at the fundamental reasons why this is happening, which is something that we realize at the university. From my experience, I think one of the prominent things that we generally don't look at is the holistic picture of multiple assessments, which a student is going through. Now, generally what happens is, if there is one module, there is one subject, there is one course, there is one tutor, and the tutor is looking only at the assessments which are required for that particular course. But when we look at it from a student perspective, they are possibly doing 6 to 7 assignments or examinations or coursework. At the same time, they are managing the deadlines. And possibly one of the reasons why they engage into such practices is they are not able to manage time. Which is where a university or a school can feature in and kind of look at their overall set of assessments and space it up in such a way that they have time that could be dedicated to some of these assessments, and they don't kind of clutter all the assignments on a given deadline and engage into these activities. So which is one thing that at our university we constantly do. We remind the students of looking at a big picture, spacing their assignments, and we putting deadlines in a way that there is some gap and some kind of breather for the students, particularly with COVID situation. We also need to look at from a student's perspective on the help that they need. The second thing is what we did at the university is not looking at an assessment as an end result, which means be it an examination, be it a coursework, be it a report that they have to submit. Generally, we begin the examination or we begin the assessment once they submit something to us. I think the assessment should start way too earlier, and the assessment should be in multiple phases, which is where we are looking at a continuous assessment of a student and reducing the chances of they getting into some external help or paying money for someone to do their assignment. So imagine if there is one assessment and I break it up into 10 small components, keep getting those submissions in over a period of time, understand how they have progressed and how they are kind of coming up with the overall progress of their assessment. So it could be a grading that we need to move beyond a one-time grading and have a continuous grading for the same assessment that could help students again phase out several things, help them manage time, and also help a tutor understand the progress of how this is being done. The best part now is where technology comes in, and now you can say that, okay, maybe I can use something like Google Drive or OneDrive or Microsoft Teams, where I can constantly assess the engagement of a student. I can constantly assess how frequently they have been working on the assignment or the assessment, and not wait till that end moment or not wait till the last component when it comes for the grading. So I think the nature of the grading should also change than compared to the one-time thing, and move on to a continuous grading that we should do, so that we identify the root causes of why they are getting into such practices and tackle them and then come up with solutions. So I think it's time to move beyond that technological platforms or elements, because as again Professor Charles said, there are these tutorials available where they know the workaround and they know how to play with technology. And how much ever you build up technologies, there will be a workaround to that, and people might come up with alternate ways. So the best way to limit this is to identify the root cause and change some of the designs of the assessments, change the nature, get into continuous evaluation rather than one-time evaluation. So these are my few cents. Of course, I'll be happy to contribute more. But I just want to, I think, listen to other colleagues as well to see what they are practicing, and will be happy to contribute more. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And I mean, your points are very well taken, particularly the notion of understanding the root cause. If we can understand why people, as Tendai was saying, if people don't believe it to be cheating, they don't understand that it's cheating, or there's a culture that pushes them towards this sort of practice, the assessment methods need to be, we need to have this conversation about, are they simply to prevent people from cheating, or are they actually to capture learning in a proper way? And so, it's part of a more philosophical conversation about why we assess. And obviously from the comments coming in the chat function, your point about varying the assessments is perfectly valid. We are then obviously faced with the challenge of relative class sizes, teacher workload, preparation time. which comes back to Tendai's point, we understand why exams are used. They're efficient, right? They are, for numbers, they are, the most effective means of assessment is multiple choice questionnaires. Not particularly pedagogically, but, for big numbers, it's a useful tool. And so, we are caught in this middle ground. So thank you very much for those views. And if you don't mind, I'll turn over to one of our board members, Srijith, for your views, responses, comments, examples, whatever you would like to share, please, Srijith.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you for hosting this session, and for the previous presenters, Dr. Charles and Dr. Krishnadas, for valuable insights. Just want to continue from where Dr. Krishnadas left off about the continuous assessment. I had also experience even pre-COVID and also more during the COVID. Is one of the concerns is these one-time submissions. And it's good to have like breaking that into 10 different submissions, but sometimes that is not allowed. I mean, it needs to be validated, the module needs to be revised. So sometimes we are stuck with, especially when you are a branch campus, you would need alignment with your home campus, so your assessments has to be same. So especially at a business school, we don't have that kind of a flexibility in terms of changing the assignments as such. So if they have a one coursework submission at the end, we are stuck with that one coursework submission at the end. But at the same time, we also want to make sure that whatever points Dr. Krishnadas mentioned, we want to implement those kind of things of continuous assessment. So one thing I found it, and it's also part of my action research, which I conducted at Middlesex, is introducing formative assessments. And it's not, we know formative assessment compared to summative assessment, it's not students' favorite because they don't get grades. But if we can make formative assessment as a requirement, not necessarily as a grading thing, and I found it to be very, very effective. And I'm not making this up because, and actually I have statistics to prove it, because but obviously it would increase your workload, that's true. But if you have a manageable class size, say around, I had around 30 students, obviously it will double your work. But if you can apply that formative assessments, you could, to a great extent, combat these issues of plagiarism coming at the end, or they use ghostwriting, because so one of these tools that we can use is having these online blogs. We all have our technology that allows students to write blogs about, so every lecture they have to, after the lecture, they have to write a small reflection about what they have learned. And also they need to submit like 2 or 3 draft submissions before their actual final submission. So we are not setting them to fail. We are giving them more opportunity so that they submit the first draft or the midterm draft, and we give them feedback. And they have to also, I also introduce a presentation so that they have to present this, their work. So they have to present, even if they're getting help from someone else, they still have to present, and they still have to know what they are presenting. And we can ask questions during that time. So although we are helping them, we can still ask them and say, make sure that whether they are themselves, and we can track their improvements, like how they are improving, how they are taking the feedback. And next time when they submit a draft, we know that they have incorporated the feedback. So formative assessment. So some of the tools that we used is the online blog, then the formative presentations where they do have to do a PowerPoint presentation. And we also had an online blog, an online week where all students can chat with each other and discuss and debate about the particular topic. So each student has to respond to other student, and other student has to respond. So it's a very informal thing. So we would kind of know who is the serious students and who is engaging well and who is not. So it would help us to know, like, then we can just focus on those few students that are actually require help or they're not engaging. So we can track them as early as possible and not leave till the last week. So that's formative assessment approach to combating this e-cheating and other related aspects. The other thing I want to mention is the impact of COVID-19, and if you remember exactly 12 months from before, like last year, same time, we won't be having this discussion at all, because we've all been running around having, trying to fix what we can do for the assessments, because we completely went from face-to-face to digital. right, during this time. And we had to shift our, assessments, and we want to, it's like we were forced to, we don't have an option. I remember we were given 1 week, I guess, to change all our exams, written exams, courseworks, change to digital, right? So yes, there were flaws because we didn't have enough time, because the ministry said, the university said, so we shifted all our assessments online. And we know, we have been discussing about these issues of grade inflation. Dr. Charles mentioned about students getting higher grades. That is expected because we all changed our assessments to e-assessments and without giving the thought process. But now that we have all these 1 year of data we have, and again, it comes back to your Center for Research and similar centers, and we could actually have a lot of data now to do actually research on. So we could know the kind of assessment used, the kind of grade inflation happened, the increase in cheating cases, what category of cheating cases this increase happened. So we have a lot of statistics that we can actually work on. And come September, whether we are going online or hybrid, we will be more prepared, and we should be more prepared. We should stop also giving excuses that, oh, we couldn't come up with assessments. There is way students will find a way to, but we can be, we can also be progressive and find a way. If you're going with assessments or not assessments, we need to ensure learning happens, and also students are not taking unfair advantage, and everyone has equal opportunity to score well and participate. So I think we can use our data that we have already collected from our own school and university. I think we could find solution to most of our issues, and we don't have to repeat the same again. I'll just end with one slide, and allow me to share that. So I found, this is based on my action research. I think I can share it. Hopefully you will be able to see these slides. Are you seeing my? Yeah, so I think you can, right? So just a second. Yeah, so this is, what I came up with, and, based on discussions with other colleagues, is one approach. Obviously, we can find a way to have the pedagogic strategies, we can find revised assessments, we can revise, assess the timing of assessment, the type of assessment, so we can look at all of those. And of course, we have the coercive strategy, we have the academic penalty, we have the the Turnitin, the plagiarism, the academic misconduct, and all of those coercive strategies still can be there. But the two other thing is, as Dr. Krishnadas said, we have the technology also. We can use some of the technology-enabled strategies, which we can actually use, especially, students in Dubai, if they have an IP login address from, say, Switzerland or from Canada, obviously there is something, either they're using a proxy or this. So especially for online test, we tell students well in advance that, you are using this UniHub, we get your IP address. So you have to use you can't use any proxy, you have to use your own IP address. And we would know that, if any of the students by chance outside the country, let us know in advance, because we would definitely we want to know who is logging in, and we can look at all their login details, what time they logged in, what time they logged out. And some students would be like, they haven't logged into the page for the last two months. And then if they're getting 100 out of 100, then you need to know why that's happened, right? So some of these are very simple tools that we can use. So technology is fantastic in that sense. And the last, obviously, is it's coming to Dr. Charles said, we need to know why they're doing, and come up with motivational strategies, right? So we need to tell them, and this is what the center is about. It's about not trying to have more penalty on students, but to create that awareness, create that knowledge of, and also sometimes they are not aware about also the penalties. So I tell my students, it's not worth it. Don't even think about it. So you have to go through all the headache just for this assessment, which you can do it in maybe in few hours or in few days. So why you take this stance of, if you want, or you invest in stock market, that's more worth, that's, don't put your money in something, it's not worth, right? It's, you might, might lose your career. I mean, you might be expelled from the university. So I clearly tell this well in advance that we have strong, academic policies in place. So first warning, you'll get a fail. At best, you get a resit, but worst case, I mean, if you do it second time and third time, it's expulsion from the university. So imagine that happened. So if it happened in first year, you still have that as a record going to second year and third year. So if it happens in third year and that's the second or third offense, then you're expelled from the uni. You lose all the fees and whatever you spent in the last 3 years. So you do all the math, it won't worth it. So creating that awareness to students it's very important. Yeah. So I think I have taken a lot of time. So that's from my side. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you very much for that. It's interesting because the beginning part of your talk, it seems, and I completely agree with you, that our best option is to put a student in a room and ask them. Like the best way we have of accurately measuring is just saying, explain to me, right? There's nowhere to hide. There's no, and obviously that's what we do at PhD level, right? That's the purpose of a Viva. It's defend and explain your ideas to me. And then obviously as your sort of responses got more towards the end, you think, well, yeah, we need some form of a matrix because the system has been focusing on the treatment rather than the cure, right? We've been looking at how do we punish or how do we manage, as opposed to if you preempt this by saying, you don't do this because, and it's not worth it because, and you build out the mechanisms. It's like, well, there's always going to be cheating because humans are humans, right? There's not much we're going to do about that. But I very much like that slide of yours. And I was just curious before we turn to Stephen, you mentioned this is action research with some of your colleagues. Is this something that you will be publishing? Is this something you'll be looking to take so we can learn from your findings and your
ideas?
So
it's a work in progress, and we are definitely in the writing up phase of submitting to a journal. So we're looking forward to getting it published and soon be available.
Excellent. Thank you.
So the idea here of action research was more of a reflection of first of all, colleagues. So we had a group of colleagues and we want to see what happened, any incident. So we share with each other. So it was more of an action group, more practice-based action group. But whatever the evidence is, we also found that, something that others can benefit from. So we can publish this. So that's
and that's excellent. I mean, Tendai and I have had a lot of these conversations over the past year about how do we accurately capture and learn from the last year's experience such that we don't go backwards. We try and build something that's more hybrid, that goes forwards, that actually has learned from, rather than, the last year just being a complete waste. And I know it's been difficult in many ways, but it's been a huge learning opportunity. And so I'm very happy to hear about, some active research going on with something to look forward to. So that's fantastic. Thank you. We just turn to Stephen. Stephen, you have some best practice examples you'd like us to, or like to discuss with us even. Let's change the focus around. Yeah, I'm not trying to claim credit for your work. That would be completely anti the point of the seminar. But yeah, sorry, please go ahead.
Yeah, just a few. It's from my perspective, I'm more of a practitioner of academic misconduct rather than a researcher. A lot of my experience comes from being on the Academic Standards Committee at Heriot-Watt University, where we do the judgment on some of these things, and we offer a lot of advice as well. And I forgot to thank the speakers. Very interesting talks and learned a lot here. But one of the points I would like to pick up on is I completely agree that we need different types of assessments in order to better assess students, but also to discourage academic misconduct. But at Heriot-Watt University, we've also got attention that we have campuses in Edinburgh and Malaysia, and we have to align all of assessments along them. And sometimes they don't realise the extent of some of these problems because they can be a bit more localised. But a lot of the time I have to be sort of pigeonholed with these traditional normative assessments, but how can we design them in order to maybe discourage academic misconduct? Or at least how can I draft an assignment so that if there is academic misconduct, particularly when it comes to like contract cheating, is it easy for me to spot and take the relevant action? So when it comes to sharing best practice, I do think it's important to note that each subject area lends itself to certain types of assessments. I teach business management, which is very much essay and report based around discussion and understanding of theoretical concepts, rather than a lot to do with stuff like calculations and the like, where answers tend to be definitive and correct. So do forgive me, but some of my best practice might not be necessarily applicable to everyone here. But yeah, how can I draft an assignment, I think, so that students are discouraged from academic misconduct? So if I can do anything other than a report or an essay, I tend to try and do that. Presentations and other sort of projects are a lot more difficult to outsource than others. So another thing I try and do as well is to make some form of group work or group peer responsibility there and get them to check each other's parts of plagiarism. With group work, because of the constant team meetings and the pressure they put on each other, there tends to be a bit less plagiarism and very, very little contract cheating, or at least that's what's been put forward to us at the Academic Standards Committee about some of the cases we get through. But a lot of the time that's not possible, and we do have to have some form of reports and essays. So some often advice that I give is try and interweave some form of attendance monitoring with that assignment. That's also a helpful thing to do. From the students that we see committing academic misconduct offences, a big hallmark is that they've not been attending. So aligning attendance with assessment and even sending maybe a preemptive email explaining to those not attending that their work's going to be put under the microscope a bit more, then that often means that we see a bit less plagiarism, very little contract cheating there. Maybe also having the university academic integrity policy drafted right into assignment guidance, it just lets know students that you're taking it very seriously. I've noticed that academic misconduct has fallen massively in my courses over the past 3 years. And that's because I've sort of developed a reputation as the plagiarism guy, the academic misconduct guy. And then I think, well, maybe I'll try it in other places, but I won't try it on his courses. So getting that reputation is sort of a good thing to do. But for the second point of how can I draft assignments so it's easier for me to spot contract cheating, because when it comes to plagiarism, there are workarounds, but we do get a lot of help from software such as Turnitin. But contract cheating generally doesn't have such helpful tools. I know that Turnitin has brought out some stylometric software to help, but my organisation is yet to be convinced to try that out. So I try to just make it as hard as possible for an essay mill to fulfil the requirements of an essay brief. I'll have a document explaining the assignments, and I'll put in that document, I'll mandate use of certain theories from the lectures and some certain sources from the lectures that have to be in the assignment, but I've never specifically named those in the guidance document. I talk about them in the lectures and the tutorials. The reason why I do that is because the essay mills don't have access to those lectures. They generally just get a coursework brief document and run with that. And they generally aren't going to put too much effort into working out exactly what's required. They just want to get paid and move on. So you end up seeing very well written assignments which don't meet the required fulfillment of the assignment brief, which is a massive indication of a contracted essay, which you can either investigate or at the very least you can fail because it hasn't fulfilled that brief. So a lot of these recommendations are just sort of coming from our practice that we've seen on the Academic Standards Committee. And I've got quite a few colleagues in right now who've experienced a lot of that on the committee with me. We have been taking academic integrity a lot more seriously over the past 3 years. And fortunately, our campuses in Edinburgh and Malaysia are starting to wake up to that. I do think some of these things don't take much additional work in order to discourage academic misconduct. And if you think about the time it takes to report academic misconduct, the gathering of evidence, completing the paperwork, and even having several meetings with students, a lot of that is unpaid work in itself. So a bit of work to discourage it in the first place often means much less work further down the line. But that's quite a lot practically focused. I'm not sure how that melds too well with the theory that underpins those actions. But that's just some of our experience at Heriot Watt, and I'd be keen to hear. I think we've got enough time for some Q&As now. Back to you, Chris. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Yeah, and I mean, obviously, the point that you raised ties in with what other speakers were saying about the need for subject-based understanding, right? So we need to sort of tailor assessments, and that goes back to Tendai's initial points that why is there one blanket assessment method just across the board, right? It's problematic. It doesn't measure authentic learning. So I think that's entirely relevant. And having worked on branch campuses myself, the point that you raised, which also Srijeth talked about, having to align to the other universities within the partnership does help to ensure quality, but also can lead to other challenges and constraints. And so we have 10 minutes now. We can open it to questions, or indeed if there are, if any of the speakers have comments that they would like to raise since they gave their talk. We've had a few issues raised in the chat function in terms about the class size and ways we can do that. And Professor Gamathi talked about a concept of assessment for learning, a series of low-stake tests for each of which give feedback for improvement. And so this sort of ongoing, sort of continual engagement. And I think one of the things that's come across from all the speakers is, in order for us as the teaching community to accurately and adequately prepare for this, we will have to do more work than we currently do. Whether it's in learning and prepping technological assessments, whether it's in understanding platforms, whether it's in designing things that, safeguard against cheating, whether it's in running 10 assessments instead of 2, whether it's in offering, this requires more work. Now, if the more work is designed towards increased embedded learning, then it's a good thing to try. But it does very easily throw up the reality that the shortest distance between 2 points is maybe not what we're trying to get at. And so it does raise, I think, some very real logistical and practical issues that are almost in direct conflict with pedagogy. Are there any of the speakers that would like to reflect on things that have been said, or to address anything, in a bit more detail? We have a few minutes for that. And otherwise,
I wouldn't mind just throwing something out.
Go ahead, please, Stephen. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, so I think we can clearly see that a COVID-19 pandemic has clearly exacerbated problems when it comes to academic integrity. But do you think this could be the best thing to happen for academic integrity in the long run? Because when you exacerbate problems, it normally means that people are going to come up with better solutions, or at least take notice. It's always been a bit of a dirty little secret among universities, things like cheating, especially contract cheating, that often gets swept under the rug. And I've certainly noticed in my organisation that now we have had COVID, all of a sudden that is when Edinburgh and Malaysia have got all of a sudden a lot more interested in this as a problem and finding a solution. So I was just wondering the panel's thoughts on that.
It's an excellent question. Would any of the 3 speakers like to respond? Whether or not we think that this actually might be, COVID, cheating's worst enemy. What do people think to this? Yes, Srijeth, please.
I mean, obviously there is a correlation between COVID and cheating, of course. And we can easily see that in the statistics, because it's obvious that many of the face-to-face assessments or written exams have been moved to online, and so there is an increase in online or e-assessments, and we can see that in the number of cases that is handled by our quality office for academic misconduct has increased compared to the last academic year before the COVID-19. So there has been an increase, definitely, in terms of the number of cases reported. Obvious, but the percentage of different levels of cases, because severity of penalties have still remained the same, but the actual number of cases has gone up. So that is one thing we are clear that we have seen that. And the next thing is obviously the grade inflation. And it's a reality, and there's no shame in saying that there has been a grade inflation, at least in subjects that I teach. And obviously we know some of the reasons why, because we can't supervise them as the way we used to do in class. And so the online exams and the online tests, and we can't enforce them to, or we can't clearly monitor them through their webcams or, some students would find a way saying, oh, my webcam is not working. I'm using a tablet which doesn't have a camera. So they would find a way to get around, whatever we try to implement, like, making sure that they have to use the webcam or take a screenshot in between, or we make an announcement in between the class. In between the exam is running, that you need to switch on the camera when your name is called. It's like, attending. So, but, still, it's a check, but to ensure that at least they are taking the exam, or at least they are active during the exam. But in no way we can actually stop them from, using books or, Googling it, or to find the answers for the questions that has been given to them. Yeah.
I think I'll just quickly add to Srijit's point. So definitely, yes, I would say we have seen a rise, but I think one of the prime reasons why we actually see this rise is, the typical assessments pre-COVID were outrightly translated to a COVID scenario, which means, if you're looking at examinations, so examination still remains an examination, but now it would be online, and you are given, let's say, 24 hours instead of 3 hours to do the assignment. Whatever coursework was happening before, whatever submissions were happening before is still happening, but the only thing that we are looking at is how can we facilitate the online version of that assessment. Whereas actually we should be looking at redesigning the assessment itself to suit this context of e-learning, to suit this context of online assessment. And this is where I think a massive change is needed. And so, for example, as Srijit rightly mentioned, you're talking about open book, and you're talking about locking the browsers and all that. Obviously, when you have the nature of the questions where people can look into the resources and outrightly answer them, then they will find ways of doing that. But then if the nature of the assessment changes in a way where, you openly declare, go ahead and look at all the resources that you can, but then to answer this question, it will test your understanding on the concepts that we have discussed in the classroom, rather than what is this sort of question. So if you change the nature of the questions, where you can very proudly and openly declare that, go ahead, use the resources, whatever you can, this is meant for online thing, but at the end of the examination, you need to come up with this. You need to develop a framework. You need to, kind of answer questions which will test your concepts, rather than, how much you have looked into facts. So that will, I think, take some time. Outrightly 2 or 3 months or 5 months or 6 months is not good enough to translate all these assessments into the context of, e-learning assessments. But I think with time, these redesigns will happen, and eventually we'll see a lower version. And just one more point, which we also look at is, these assessments, how much of these assessments can be used beyond the classroom, which means, it's not just for the sake of your marks and your grades that you're doing a certain assessment, but, can you use this assessment in your CV, and you can say that, hey, I've done this and I've built this and I've worked on this. Maybe the same assessment that you're doing for the coursework, you could participate with that in a competition, get into places where you can showcase. And again, all these things would further reduce the chances of just checking the box for the student and saying, hey, I need to do this and I need to get grade. But when they have a bigger motivation and incentive, possibly their chances of venturing into the practices would reduce. So I think, yes, the answer is yes, there is an increase, but then it's because we are literally translating it to a technological platform rather than redesigning the assessment.
Yeah, I would agree with the points raised there. And coming from a sort of behavioral psychology perspective as well, I would say that one of the problems we had with COVID is within the house. If you think about these students at home, parents started complaining about why they were paying full fees, right, for university and schools when we're not on campus anymore. So students are hearing this negativity from their parents about, oh, what's the point of spending this money? Also, when the parents are actually sitting in the living room and watching some of the online lessons themselves, they weren't always impressed. So you get lots of parents saying, oh, the teaching quality isn't good. So they're getting lots of negative messages at home. So now when they're struggling and studying independently, they're thinking, oh, well, the course wasn't good anyway. You know, mum and dad said the teacher isn't any good. You know, why shouldn't I get some support from somebody, right? So I think that's also probably played a role in where there's been more cheating, unfortunately.
That's an excellent point, and it relates actually to one of the comments that Elizabeth had put in the chat function, which is this sort of, you know, her particular point was about the adjunct or casual non-tenured lecturers, where, you know, student feedback, student engagement has a direct impact on, you know, in some cases promotion, or in some cases, you know, a job, right? And so it is this sort of symbiotic relationship, which is often motivated by very, very different underpinning philosophies, right? One is, I want to pass. I give you money, you give me degree, right? It's a very simple transactional understanding versus, well, I'm trying to embed, you know, deep thinking and authentic pedagogy. And you think, well, those don't always mesh very, very clearly together. And so I wonder if that might be a conversation bigger than we have the time for now, but I wonder if that might be a topic for another webinar, Zenith, you know, this actual, you know, not just the assessment design, but the actual management of teaching staff and as Tendai pointed out in his talk, and of parents. So this relationship from teachers to students to parents, and how that understanding is administered but also supported. I think it's a very, very critical term. And I noticed that we are essentially out of time now, but I think this is a topic that maybe Elizabeth might like to come back for another webinar to sort of be one of the panelists, perhaps. So I'll thank everybody, but hand back to Zenith for sort of any comments or thoughts she might have. Elizabeth, yeah, it wasn't, didn't mean to put you on the spot. It was more of a, you know, an opportunity for us to further the conversation down the line, perhaps more than you must speak. That seems a little bit draconian. But, you would always be welcome anyway.
This was a fabulous session, and you're right, we could just keep going on and on because there's so much to discuss here, but I think all the speakers just hit the nail on the head. We can't just turn around and say students are cheating more, because have we done enough from our side, right? And I think that message has really come across really well. So thank you. This was so like, you know, for once I was not talking, I was listening. It was fantastic to listen to all of you guys. It was so engaging. I loved it. I love my role being in the background for this time and listening to you guys, the wealth of information that you guys passed on to all our audience. And of course, this is a recorded session, so we will be making this available through the website. So I'm sure a lot of people will have a lot of things to take away from the session today. So thank you so much, everyone.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much to everybody. Thank you. And we look forward to the future events and more conversation, and good luck to all of us, right? It's a long road ahead, but the more we debate, the more we think, the more we reflect, the more we share, right? The maybe marginally easier it will become. So with this, I think we'll formally close the webinar. Thank you to all participants, to all speakers in particular, and everybody stay safe and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.